International Relations and Cooperation Minister Ronald Lamola says South Africa will continue to strengthen its bilateral relations with Russia. He concluded a two-day working visit to the Russian Federation. Now, during his visit to Moscow, Minister Lamola co-chaired the 18th session of the Inter-Governmental Committee on Trade and Economic Cooperation, alongside Mr. Alexander Kozlov, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of the Russian Federation. Lamola also met his Russian counterpart, Minister Sergei Lavrov. SABC News correspondent Dasha Chernyshova joins us now from Moscow with the very latest. Dasha, good evening to you and thank you so much for your time. What's the latest then with regards to the outcomes of that meeting?
Well, we know that this meeting has taken place in the Russian capital, that was taking place on the margins of the 18th session of the Inter-Governmental Committee on Trade and Economic Cooperation between the two countries, with both sides saying that the results of that session are expected to even further increase the cooperation between these two countries in the area of trade, science and technology. Now, we understand that in the conversation that Lamola had with Russian Minister Lavrov, the sides have been touching upon the wide scope of issues related not only to the bilateral relationship but also to the international agenda. We understand that South Africa's ministry has issued a statement in which it has reconfirmed its appreciation to Russia's efforts and Russia's support of South Africa holding G20 and being the president of this organization for now, and saying that Russia has also been very important in advocating the reform of the UN Security Council in terms of the wider representation of the Global South in this body. We also hear in the Russian Foreign Administration its comments and suggesting that Moscow appreciates the cooperation between the two countries when it comes to the international organizations, including BRICS, G20, the United Nations and others. We also hear in South African side saying that it has reconfirmed its commitment to the negotiated settlement of the conflict in Ukraine, calling for the urgent need for the de-escalation and the cessation of hostilities to pave the way for a negotiated settlement. So the general line is that this was an important meeting, yet another one between the two ministers in order to improve and even further cooperation between these two countries.
And especially when you look at the issues around the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and this is important, especially given the fact that it's gone on for so long, and it's no surprising that then, International Relations Minister will then say it's quite important to see an end of this as speedily as possible, as you just said.
That's right, and this was one of the issues that was discussed because it does impact all the other areas of the international relations. So for the South African ministry, we understand it was absolutely important to convey its idea that a negotiated settlement based on the inclusive dialogue is something that is needed. At the same time, Moscow does have its own concerns, and there are plenty of them. Moscow is now in talks with the Americans on the cessation of hostilities and the negotiated settlement on the Ukraine conflict, but the very idea of settling this conflict does seem to be much more difficult. In the meantime, we're also hearing that there is more room for the cooperation between Russia and the Global South, and Moscow doesn't want this to be affected by the ongoing conflict, suggesting that the root causes of the Ukraine conflict have to be eliminated. But meanwhile, Moscow is building its relationship with other countries. For instance, in this 18th session, we understand that they have been talking about the increased cooperation between South Africa and Russia when it comes to the issues of transportation, when it comes to the issues of trade, digital technologies, as well as mass communications, education, expansion. So we understand that even though the conflict in Ukraine is still ongoing and many countries are trying to bring the negotiated settlement idea closer, Russia says it is going to make sure that its concerns are alleviated while also building its ties with other countries.
And I suppose the visit also coming at a time when South Africa, and I would say even both countries and even the globe, continues in its effort to diversify, some international partnerships and possibly strengthen their positions, given some of the geopolitical tensions that we've seen and even the situation potentially in the United States.
That's right, and this is exactly what Moscow says is happening. This is the multipolar world order, and the perception in Moscow is that it plays an important role in making sure that there are multiple poles in this world. There is no hegemony, that all the countries are well represented, and this is the idea that Moscow has had for quite some time in terms of the representation, wider representation of the global South. We do know that Moscow has extensive ties with many countries of the global South, but Moscow does want to make sure that those are not just ties in terms of the words. Those are the ties in terms of the real and concrete steps, and therefore such visits as the one that we have seen by Ronald Lamola to Moscow are very important for making sure those ties are maintained. Just keep in mind that's not the first time they are meeting. There was another conversation between Lavrov and Lamola in February, and there will be more to come, particularly especially when we talk about other international gatherings, including the BRICS and the meeting of the foreign ministers in Brazil.
And of course, a lot of focus on the developments then going forward, Dasha. Thank you so much for that update there. That was Dasha Chernyshova, SABC News correspondent, live for us in Moscow.